Hello and welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, co-owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined as always by Dr. Mathias Nordvig.
Hello. This time we're joined by Ruben Terlouw from
You say that so much better than I would.
I don't know if I'm saying it right. I see Ruben is laughing a little bit, so I'm probably not. But Ruben, you're one of the warriors in the band Heilung. You're also an archaeologist and a pretty decent photographer, if you ask me, and sort of like a multi-talent. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thank you for having me both. Yeah.
No, you're welcome. You certainly do have
following you.
What was that? Sorry.
It's been interesting following you. I think I met you a year ago now, Mathias, and
yeah, that's true.
I think I declined a few times.
Yeah, I've asked you a couple of times. I mean, the world fell apart a year ago. Was it like one of the last concerts you guys must have done?
Yeah, the last one was almost a year ago now. It was at Nordvig festival in.
Oh, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. So you will have been in Colorado, I guess, just before that.
Yeah, that was mid-January, right?
That was mid-January. I think. I mean, with our knowledge about Corona now, we must have been in the middle of it. We just didn't know.
Spreading it all over the place.
Yeah, I might have spit so many people in the face without knowing that I had Corona.
Oh, I know. It's crazy without speaking too much about Corona, because I don't think people like hearing it more than they need to these days.
Yeah. We're all pretty sick of it.
Yeah, I went to my best friend's. I think it was his 30th birthday party that was all booked for, it's like the 16th of March. We were kind of umming and ahhing whether to go because we didn't know what was going to happen. And that was like 3 or 4 days before they locked down the UK. And I dread to think now it's like how many people, there might have been 50 people there, but no one was taking any consideration to the situation. So stuff like that can't have made it any better.
Mm.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember the show down in Denver. The venue was packed. Everybody was basically like
sweating.
Like this.
Looking at all those photos now, and even maybe seeing the videos, it makes me question like when can we do that again? And at the same time, like holy shit, I wouldn't want to be in such a crowd right now. Mm-hmm. It's almost scary.
Yeah, it's worrying because I love those environments. I love a good concert where it's tight and you get that atmosphere. And I wonder if we're going to lose some of that and how many people are going to, or how long it will take to get back to that, and whether some people will be a little bit put off from those situations.
Yeah.
But hopefully not. Hopefully you guys will be back soon.
I mean, I think we have been quite lucky with Heilung that in such a short time we could have toured, and we have toured the whole world, or at least quite a bit of it. And I mean, to have played for 3.5 weeks, doing show to show in America, that was really quite something. So I guess I should consider myself happy being part of a band that can do that, because there's so many musicians who dream of a life like that, and I think everybody at this point hopes to be back on stage, where it's small or big.
Hopefully
we are far from the only artists who are hit by Corona like this.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I think a lot of different industries are. Anyone who relies on live shows.
Yeah.
It's a tough time. So you have a particularly interesting role in Heilung, I think, or at least your kind of group. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So for the people who don't know, I am one of the black Harii warriors, or just warriors as we say, maybe slaves. No, but so we have a little band that is part of the bigger band that is Heilung, and we do our own thing there. Particularly Alpha the High Tier, you can hear us So we are all painted black with our black shields and spears, and we do a bit of our own thing in Heilung, and I'm a little part of that. I have been since the very beginning as well. So,
so do you have to stick to a script as such, or do you get free reign to do what you want?
I think Heilung would be even more chaotic than it already is if we had free reign, but we do have obviously a bit of a script or a choreography, if you want to call it that. As I said, the warriors, we have a bit of our own little thing in Heilung. So we are not on stage constantly, for example, but we come in at certain songs and we do our thing, and there's a bit of choreography in there in certain songs, and it all developed to the show that it is now. And what you can see on the internet, say our Lifa show, for example, that is quite famous on YouTube. We have developed so much since that show, and that was actually our very first show ever. So things are developing, and the warriors are definitely a little part of that.
But it's a very integral role too, right? It's you have like what you're doing is part of carrying the live show as well, right?
Yeah, I guess you could say it like that. We definitely are a bit of a connecting factor between Heilung as a band or a group of musicians and the audience, because I like to think of Heilung as a bit, not really a band, but more of really a show, a multimedia experience. And we may, as warriors, make the bridge between the audience and the band. Also because we go into the audience and then do a bit of dancing and brawling in the last song, Hamre Hipia. Yeah. So then you can actually touch us. So now you can feel Heilung, and you can see Heilung.
You can mosh with Heilung.
Yeah, you can mosh with Heilung. You can do whatever the fuck you want with Heilung. As long as you do not climb the stage. But it's really quite different from any other band, I think. Or from most bands, I should say.
Yeah, definitely. It adds, I guess, that extra dimension to the experience. Somebody, because we've all been probably at rock concerts where maybe the lead singer jumps and does like a little bit of a stage dive or whatever, but actually having one of the members off the stage come into the crowd definitely adds another layer, and it just makes everyone that little bit more hyped, I guess, as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it makes a nice connection to the historical part that I guess we will talk about later. But what we try to do in Hamre Hipia is create this circle, and obviously many people will recognize that from the circle pit you indeed see in many of the metal festivals and stuff like that. But it's really cool to see the whole audience move along with the song instead of just only beating the shit out of each other. We actually try to do a bit of historical stuff in there.
Give it a bit of reason.
Yeah, right, exactly.
How many of them is there?
So that is actually a funny question, because we want to have 9 warriors on stage, and that's what we try to aim, but we don't always manage to have 9. So what we do here is we invite people over to send in a song, or a recording of themselves. Sometimes we've done that in the past, and then we have a selection, and some local people can then join us on stage.
Oh, that's awesome. So is it like a competition, or are you picking people who can sing? Am I out? I have no chance.
No. Like, it's not really a competition, no. But we do select people on their voice and their appearance, and whether we think whether or not they have the so-called warrior spirit in them.
That's me definitely
that's
not getting
a
chance.
The past, at least, and now we are reevaluating that idea.
I think that's quite a cool thing. I mean, obviously, it's whether you can get I mean, I'm assuming you could fill 9 spots fairly easy. But I think it's quite nice that you get local people if you can. It adds, I guess, again, that probably adds something to the experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in the United States, we even had real First Nation people on, and we talked to them about what they would like to see, and because we are in a sense obviously on their ground, and they have a very local history there, and we would like to connect to that. I mean, it was fascinating talking to them and hearing their stories, and when they shared their part of historical dance and everything.
Did you find many crossovers or similarities? Because I imagine it seems like there would be some.
Oh yeah, and definitely. I mean, from many First Nation or Native American, whatever you want to say, tribes, it is known that they have the same history in shape shifting and circular dance and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, there's a ton of similarities that you could argue about or theorize about, but in my eyes, when I asked them about their circular dance or their wolf dance, so to speak, they had so many stories that rang bells going back in our own European history, and not only European. I mean, there's plenty of links all over the world with stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we are definitely dealing with a sort of a complex of thought or worldview that's very ancient. That's shared, has been shared by people across the planet in different ways and forms. Obviously, of course, always taking on a local shape wherever we find it. One of the interesting things is also the early Germanic culture seems to be very tied to a circumpolar complex of thought or a worldview, if you will. Where we see this what is like broadly called shamanic practices being used. That's very obvious from the Old Norse material in particular.
Yeah, and I think if we would still live in the way that let's say the First Nation people live in America right now, we would also think that way, because now we have to look back as modern people and guess what are the ties between this tribe and this tribe, or this tribe in this country there and this country. You get the idea. But this way of thinking is, I think, very, or arguably very similar to what we or how we lived at the time. But obviously that is all lost. And yeah, you have to be careful making all these links with say the Native American people, obviously. But I think it's pretty fair to say that there must have been many similarities, most of which are lost now, of course.
Yeah.
All I can think of is the last episode of Vikings, where I don't know if you've watched it yet, where Uber goes to North America and kind of meets some native tribes, and I can't help but think about that. So many people will probably take that to be gospel now, and kind of have, and any links that are there almost just think of them as being true, and that I sometimes think that can be the bad side or the downside to some of the modern popular culture TV shows. Yeah.
Sorry, I froze for a bit, so I didn't get that all, Daniel.
Okay. No, I was just saying, I don't know whether you watched the TV show Vikings.
Yeah, I have. I would really like to join on the new podcast idea that you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. So I was just saying on the last series where Uber goes to North America and kind of meets a native a native tribe, and they kind of get on and swap, swap items, and the relationship begins. And I was just saying, I wonder how many people now take that to be gospel, because obviously you already get a lot of people tag on to, the Vikings discovered America, and some people think they got all the way down to Minnesota. So I just wondered the negative side sometimes to shows like that, where they put things in that I think a lot of people then assume to be real. And you, like you were just saying, you have to kind of be careful of just making those ties between the two.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's plenty of people who say, "Oh, they do that right over here as well," and I'm like, yeah, I get that, sure, but you have to be a bit careful making these assumptions. But there must maybe is a big word, but there has to be some kind of basis in there, obviously.
So the
Sorry. They sent Uppe to America.
Have you not watched it?
I have not watched it, and I'm not going to.
Okay, so spoilers. Anybody? Like, it might be too late, but spoilers for anybody that hasn't watched it. Yeah. So Uber goes to Iceland, then decides he wants to go to Greenland. They're on Greenland for maybe a week. Shit hits the fan, they fall out, and then they land in like Newfoundland area. I assume they don't really make it clear. There's about 8 of them left, and then they meet a Native American tribe. They have a nice relationship, and then they find Floki in a tree. Obviously,
of course.
I mean, I don't know how Floki got there on his own, all the way from Iceland.
Right.
I have no idea. No, but there's gonna be so many people hating on me now.
Yeah, you're giving everybody the spoilers here, but okay, so that's interesting to hear. I mean, obviously, because the figures that are involved with the original story in the sagas, right? That those are very well-known individuals, sort of like culturally in Scandinavia and also here in North America. So, like, Eric the Red, he's the guy who goes to Greenland.
That's what seems a little bit odd, because obviously everybody knows that Netflix are doing a spin-off called Vikings Valhalla, and the characters in that are Eric. I think Eric the Red is in there. Leif Erikson is a character in there. So I found it a little bit odd that they squeezed this storyline in for Uber when they're making a show kind of with those original characters in there, that they could have done this within their own right and made a little bit more of a thing, rather than it being rushed and him kind of island hopping almost.
Right. Yeah. No, that is a little weird. Well, I mean, you never know. Maybe one day we can have one of the writers from that show come on.
Well, when we hit 100 patrons, we'll be able to watch the whole series and find out our thoughts, won't we?
That's right. So, Ruben, I wanted to ask you, now that we're digging into historical sources and all that stuff, what's sort of the historical underpinning for the warriors in Heilung, and like how you're like painted black and all that stuff?
Yeah, so that is part of the Harii aesthetic. So the Harii were this tribe described by the Roman writer Tacitus in the 1st century, and this is an account that he did not witness himself. Obviously, that is I guess commonly known that he wasn't there in person, but he got these accounts from returning soldiers. So I guess the way that it is written down is fairly accurate. But anyway, what is described is that the Roman soldiers eventually were attacked or saw a war band that they called the Harii, and these warriors were painted black, and they attacked at night, and they were equipped with both black shields and spears. And I think I cannot quote it one-on-one, but it was said that the white of the eyes was the first thing that you would encounter when you would encounter these Harii warriors. So it has been debated that these warriors formed a war band, and that the Harii is the name for the war band. But we're not sure about that or how accurate that is. But it is pretty widely accepted that they were part of the Lugi tribe, that is from south central Poland nowadays, and they are closely linked to the Vandals, which is a more well-known tribe, I guess, from the same area. And there's obviously some debate on where these tribes were located exactly, and since there's hardly any archaeological evidence or any at all for the Harii, we have to rely on these accounts by Tacitus.
Yeah, but I mean, etymologically, it seems very likely that the word Harii is the Germanic word for warrior, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And also the word Haar relates to the word Heer, as in warband. The whole thing. But in the early 20th century, you had Otto Hoffler, for example, a German writer, and Lily Wieser, who wrote about, or Weiser, I should say, I'm not sure, wrote about the Männerbunde as being a little war band of warrior men. But there is no real evidence for a concept like the Männerbunde, really. And archaeologically speaking, it is very hard to make anything of it. So we really have to base our assumption on the accounts that have been written down.
Yeah, that's true. It is interesting, though, that with some of the earliest runic inscriptions we actually see from the Danish area, we have the Vimose comb, which is the first official runic inscription.
With the Haria on it.
Yeah, it says Haria. There's also a couple of others that are interesting. Like one is Svarta, so that means black. So you could always sort of like theorize based off of like very little evidence, but it's just interesting to see how it aligns in some ways.
It's funny because especially now with Heilung and what we do, this concept of the Harii has been on this looking glass, and on the internet you read the wildest theories of how they looked and acted and things like that. But really, there is only one mention by Tacitus, and you can, with a lot of theorizing, you can maybe link a few other things to there, but really there is not very much that we know about the Harii at the end of the day.
I mean, it would make sense that somebody at some point would do that, because it kind of just makes obvious, it's obvious camouflage. If it's nighttime and you want to sneak up and kill somebody, it makes sense to paint yourself black. As well, just assuming that, they didn't have much light pollution back then, so things would naturally have been a hell of a lot darker than they are for us now as well. So nighttime would have been
really fucking dark.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes sense that somebody would have done that. It's not kind of like out of the realms of possibility, and it's also fucking terrifying. Like, imagine.
I mean, it is, and these tactics are still used today. It's funny because I'm actually in the process of applying into the army, and I have a lot of friends that are in the army, and we were talking about the modern day tactics versus the tactics used in pre-Christian times, and there's definitely some stuff that survives. Even the weapon dances survive to this day, in the sense that they're still like the saber rattling, and in the United States Army they still, and many other armies I should say, they still do the dances with the weapons as well, the firearms. So
I mean, it completely makes sense that it lasts today as well. Because if you had the Navy SEALs or the SAS going to do a night mission, they're not going in hot pink outfits, are they? Naturally they're going to wear all black because it makes perfect sense.
Although hot pink would really be cool though.
I would. That would be,
thinking
to be fair,
about
that would be equally as terrifying, I think. If like this squadron of death just came after you in hot pink, it would be almost as bad, I think.
It would be really intimidating, especially if the hot pink army wins.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, yeah. No, I'm starting to see a concept here that I would very much like to see in the future.
So I guess the only thing that I'm curious about is how, quote unquote, like honorable or manly is it to attack at night dressed in all black? Because it seems like it's this idea of you fight face to face is the honorable thing to do, to go into battle head on, whereas sneaking in at night and sort of executing someone, is that seen negatively?
I get the idea. I get where you're going, but you have to take into account that we don't really know a lot about war tactics, especially not from the Germanic side of warfare, so to speak. And they were fighting a huge structured army. The Romans that were continuously advancing into their territory. So, I mean, the Roman army versus a little local tribe is not very manly in itself, I guess. If you're talking about how fair is warfare.
Well, that's it. I think the best tactic is the one where you don't die. I don't think there is a fair tactic in war, but people do kind of put that behind it, though. How it's cowardly to hide.
But I would say, so the one thing I would say regarding that is that that's sort of the modern popularized and idealized version of sort of like a Viking warrior that like I face you and all that stuff.
Matthias, just before you go too far, because I was gonna.
Sorry.
No. It's just no. What it is what you're gonna say. You're probably gonna have to answer my next question with that anyway, so it would make more sense. So I was listening to Viking Britain by Thomas Williams, and he was saying how the Anglo-Saxons tended to want to have this fight face to face, and then when the Vikings came, they tended to not necessarily hide in the shadows, but were more willing to use kind of tactics of being in the woodlands or staying out of sight, and not necessarily being one-on-one face to face, like two armies lining up and just clashing against each other. And how accurate is that? And does
I'm not an expert on this, because this is really a different field of studying. But what I can say is that what you see in many movies, for example, or TV series, I should say, maybe, is that there's this general idea that Vikings had no structure in their army or raiding party at all, and were just going into the fray like there's no tomorrow. But that is not really true, because we actually do know that there were some tactics that were used in the field, some formations that were used, and I'm not only talking about the shield wall that obviously comes to mind, but there were actually tactics that were both done on foot as well as on horse. Because when you go back in the pre-Viking times, let's say the Vendel era, a lot of warfare was done by horseback or on horseback, and there were definitely some tactics used in that fashion of warfare. So it wasn't only one-on-one and unstructured fighting.
So that's a really good point. So we can see a couple of things. I'm of course not an expert on sort of like the historical components of war in that regard, and tactics and all that stuff. But what we know from Defiance of Warriors in Ilderup Odin in Denmark, and they are like what third century?
Yeah, 3rd century AD.
Warriors, Germanic warriors. Most of them don't have any armor. They have spears and shields, and they're infantry. And then you have a few elite who have horses, and they are, they have like really cool stuff, like beautifully adorned reins and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then so there's a couple of things you have to consider, right? These people must have had some kind of, this is me riffing on sort of like basic logics.
Yeah.
They must have had some kind of formation, some kind of tactic that they would have used, because otherwise they would have been completely destroyed if they were up against a full armored Roman army, right? You wouldn't be able to take down the Roman shield wall, right? If you do not employ really skillful tactics. And this is what we assume, I guess, happened at Teutoburgerwald in the year 9 when Varus was obliterated, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what do we know from later sources? We know that there is the so-called Svinfylking, which is some kind of formation. We don't know exactly.
The boar snout idea. Yeah. So how do I summarize this? I have to summarize warfare. How funny. So this formation has a little wedge, so to speak, in the front, and that would mean that the opposing party would have to attack that little wedge first. And then the second wave comes. This is all in one formation, obviously. So second wave is not very accurate here, but the opposing party moves to attack the boar snout, and then the second wave comes rumbling in, and this really creates two parties within the opposing party, which is easier for the attacking party, which, from this point of view, speaking, would be the Vikings or anyone using it around.
You would basically be able to split up their rank.
Yeah, you do split up their rank if successful, and there is more to this, because if you're talking about mounted warfare on horseback, there would be a whole different tactic to this, and maybe you will use bows. There's not a lot of evidence for bows, but we know that there were bows, and this changes the whole thing, obviously. And you mentioned Varus. This is a very unique battle, of course, 9 AD, where you can speak of a tactic, but I'm not sure how how do you say that? Well, let me put it this way. I'm not sure if they invented this specific tactic for that specific battle. I know that there was a few other battles that had similar success and similar structure to it, but that might have been after the Teutoburgerwald battle. I'm not sure, but obviously you have to use your terrain if you're attacking this big, slow-moving army that is the Romans, because it is known, and they did know, that the Romans moved very slowly, and they took that to their advantage, and I praise them for that.
And that's, by the way, I think it was Jugurtha in Northern Africa who used guerrilla warfare tactics on the Romans and their formation, and basically also managed to beat them in that way. So that's been sort of like the way to beat the Romans.
Attack them from above and from the side. But there have been multiple battles in Germany that had the same preset, so to speak.
Yeah, that's true.
And then Varus, the Teutoburgerwald battle, is obviously very famous for that. And we are still finding out new evidence about this battle. So in 10 years, we might know a lot more, because it was only until pretty recently that we knew the exact site of the battle, which is Kalgriese, which is far more north than was originally thought.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's really exciting, though.
It is, yeah.
I know nothing about the battle, so can you give like a quick summary of it? What happened? Who won? Who lost?
Okay. You and me, Matthias, because I know that you hated the Barbarian series, by the way.
You read my blog post on that.
I really like that series, but we can talk about that after this. So, yes. Daniel, Varus was a auxiliary soldier, not really a soldier. I'm not sure of his exact rank. Sorry, but he was a Germanic person in the Roman army, and eventually he turned against Rome, knowing their tactics, and in a preset setting, the Germanic tribes, so to speak, formed one army. You cannot really call it an army, but anyway, and defeated the Roman army in a 3-day battle and killed over, I think, 3 legions equals about 25 or 30,000 Roman soldiers, and it was a really messy battle because both the Romans didn't know what was happening. Obviously, there was a lot of surprise, and it also rained like shit these 3 days, and the Germanic tribes obviously used that to their example. Eventually, Varus killed himself, and there's the famous saying, "Varus, give me back my legions," which still echoes in Rome, they say.
Yeah, that was Caesar.
That was Caesar.
falling to his knees.
Yeah. Also used in a Heilung song, by the way. So yeah, and there. You have this new Netflix series, Barbarian, and Matthias is a big fan.
I haven't watched it yet. I think I need to watch it.
Okay, well,
I think my main grievance is this typical. They call it Barbarian, so barbarians, and I think that's my main problem with it. That they have made these people more barbarian than they actually were. That they,
even using the name Barbarian is already a bit funny, maybe.
No, it's very, very questionable if you ask me.
Very. And but I guess it sells. It speaks to the imagination, maybe. But from talking about that, and the reason why I like the series is because they actually dressed the Barbarian, the Germanic tribes, pretty accurately for modern day TV standards. I mean, I could bitch about the little details, but I mean, Vikings has a lot more that I could bitch about.
Mm-hmm. They have armor that looks like, lawn chairs and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I saw the people wearing the Suabian knot, which is a hair tie.
Yeah, that's a nice detail.
Yeah, and I saw the women wearing what's called a sprang, also a way to tie the hair. Mm-hmm. The tunics that they were wearing were, I guess, were okay, and they properly used the capes or the prachtmantels, I should say. Mm-hmm. And the weaponry was actually pretty accurate. They did replicate some finds that are pretty well known from the area. So they did use some artistic freedom in dressing these people, but you can all pinpoint it to certain finds, or at least quite a bit of it. And I really like to see that because Vikings didn't do that. And I mean, the villages that they used in the series were a bit questionable.
Quite questionable, if you ask me. Some of the constructions, you're like, what was this made by? Like chips?
It looked like a chicken thing where
chicken coop. Yeah.
And,
It's like, so the chieftain's hall is a giant chicken coop.
Yeah,
Come on, guys.
Okay, I would say to pull it back on some kind of topic to more sort of like Nordic times. You wanted to speak about? Oh, okay, here we go. For the people listening, we've just Ruben has just put on a typical, looks like a knitted Viking helmet with horns. Very, very, very accurate.
But go on, Daniel. We're a podcaster on here.
No, I mean, you look exactly like those little Odin head figures that have been found.
Yeah, I guess that was what we were going to talk about, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you want to speak about Odin's warrior cult, which would be the Berserker and the Ulfhedin. I guess before we get into it, is there any link between like the Harii and those? Can we kind of like? I'm just seeing if we can make like a segue through that into Berserker.
I mean, it's complicated, I guess, but yes and no. So I talked about this idea of the Männerbunde, and there's still debate on if this term Männerbunde, which means band of men, very roughly translated, sorry, is really accurate or not. But when you talk about the warrior cult of Odin, and even I have to get back on that later, you're talking about little groups of trained young warriors that could form a band that the Harii that I talked about earlier supposedly formed. But there's a lot of debate, and speaking as an archaeologist who has, by the way, not written about this, so I'm not like this super expert, but I have studied this quite a bit. There is very little evidence to support the idea of, or the concept of the Berserker and the Ulfhednar or Ulfhedin. And Mathias knows a lot about them, I guess, from the written sources, but this is all years, maybe even hundreds of years after you would have seen these warrior bands, the Ulfhednar or the Berserker.
Yeah, I mean, we have one depiction, right, from a helmet in Sweden from the 600s that
so
suggests some person wearing a wolf or bear skin. Or
no, we actually have quite a lot, but they all stem from indeed the 6th and 7th century. We have the one from Torslunda that you're referring to with the dancer next to it. But we also have one four actually, two separate finds, one from Oberheim, Germany, and from Gutenstein, which is on a scabbard. And this scabbard is, by the way, quite possibly a refitted from a helmet. So it was supposed to be on a helmet like you would see in the Vendel period.
Oh, really? I was not aware of the German finds.
Yeah. So, and there's actually more, because we also know one from Van Drayton, which is in the United Kingdom. So there's quite many actually, and I recently came upon a find in the Netherlands, which doesn't depict a wolf warrior, but is in the same category as you would see in Sweden and England. So in the near future, we are probably gonna write about this Dutch find as well, because it really connects Frisia to, let's say, Germany, Sweden, and England. But this is another topic.
So are they images on the finds, or is it wording?
Oh no. They are image. So we are really talking about a society that talks via pictures, I guess. I wouldn't know how to phrase that correctly, but these are what's called pressblech images, which are stamped upon a die, so to speak. And these images are later refitted on helmets or scabbards. So they are really...
Going back to what we were talking with Martin Carver about with Sutton Hoo, right? What we're dealing with is in this period of time from, it probably begins in the 400s at least, is a common visual language that that basically goes along the English Channel on both sides and into Scandinavia and at least northern Germany, possibly also central parts of Germany, right?
Yeah.
And it looks like it's a at least what we can see from the rulership culture, it looks like it's the same or similar culture. They share concepts, they share ideas. What it looks like, if you ask me, from sort of like the mythological perspective on all of this, is that we're dealing with rulers who are connected in different ways by trade, by marriage, those kinds of things. And they are establishing themselves, legitimizing their rule based off of association with the gods, right? The war god Odin, as an example, could be an example. Looks very much to be the case, right? And if we go by the written material, then it suggests that these warriors then are closely associated with Odin as the standing army that this ruler will have in their location. That's what in medieval Scandinavia and possibly also in Viking Age Scandinavia is known as the Hird. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the question is then how many of these dudes would dress up in bear and wolf skin and then go nuts on the battlefield?
So
just before we get to that, are we saying that they existed or not? Like, if we were to put a definite answer to it, would you, or at least if you were to hedge your bets, would you say lean in the way of yes or no?
I would say yes, but
okay, yeah, I think that's probably the right answer.
Right. So where to start? Let's. So a lot of things that we see in archaeology, I'm speaking for that perspective here. So maybe Matthias, you can tag along from the literal perspective here, or the mythological. So what we see in archaeology is that a lot of typologies or way things are presented come from the Roman period and possibly even before. And you can talk about material culture here, but also about how things were going. Maybe even talking about war bands, but let's stick with archaeology now. So a lot of things that we see come from there and slowly move up to Scandinavia. And this even goes for the idea of a god like Odin. Because we don't know if the Berserker, the Ulfhednar, really were warriors of Odin, because this deity really set foot in culture. I should maybe rephrase that, but in the Viking Age, but in the Vendel period, that Neil Price recently, famous archaeologist obviously, recently rephrased as early Viking in that period. So we're talking about 550 to 790 here. We see a lot of this archaeological evidence about dancing figures with horned helmets and things that look a lot like are later described as being Berserker and Ulfhednar. So this concept of Berserker and Ulfhednar came later, and we know about them because of the mythological writings. But there's a lot of archaeology that could support this idea that is later written down. But we're not sure if these depictions on these images are, in fact, Ulfhednar or Berserker. They could well be just elite warriors that really didn't really have a name to them, but were distanced themselves from, say, ordinary soldiers by the tactics that they used or the way that they behaved in battle, or maybe possibly before battle and after battle, like is is later described in the sagas. Mathias can probably correct me on that, but there's this big idea of what is a berserker and what is a Ulfhednar, but we really don't know what they exactly were. That's what it all comes down to.
That's that's how everything about that time period in needs to be prefaced. Like we have theories, but we really don't know.
Yeah.
That's the usual answer,
right?
Just sorry to interrupt you again, but just to put like a little bit of structure for in my own mind, I guess, is did the typical idea of an army exist? Did Vikings have professional armies, as in would a king have people that were solely soldiers, that was their profession, rather than just kind of bringing people in when needed?
Yeah, the Vikings had professional armies.
Okay.
That's very clear. That's really what defines the Viking Age, I would say. Professional armies with kings or leaders, chieftains, whatever you want to call them, with ambition. So I think when Neil Price calls the Vendel period the early Viking Age or something like that, I think that's very accurate, because this is the time period where the culture that we see, the sort of like the military and maritime and rulership culture that we see in the Viking Age, that's when it's invented. It's that period from 550 to 690 for sure. And it could not come into existence without the trade network that begins in the northern Frankish area in Frisia and in the English area. This is how these Scandinavian local chieftains basically managed to build up their wealth and accumulate wealth over generations, so that they become important enough basically to have decisive influence on Western Europe in different ways in England. So Viking Age is basically, I guess, sort of like the fruition of like generations over centuries of ambition to actually go there and take over that shit.
But I do have to say that like in archaeology we tend to like name different time periods according to their to the finds or to the stylization of certain objects. So the Vendel period, or let's say the period before what we generally accept as the Viking Age, did stand out in the sense that a lot of material culture was very different from what we know from the Viking Age. So the helmets and the weaponry that I specialize in, and that are famous, are these really elaborate looking helmets with all these images on there that we just talked about and that I will talk about later. But the Vendel period itself in the name comes from the place Vendel where these helmets were found, and close to Vendel is Valsgärde, and which had similar boat burials, and obviously the boat burial from Sutton that you recently talked about falls into the same time period, and it's even possible that the helmet that is made from Sutton that we know from Sutton is made in Scandinavia, and that was imported via these trade networks that you just talked about. But I as a Dutchman, I have to say that I always miss the Frisians in this equation. There is still a lot to prove here and there, but there are similarities and pieces found in Frisia that I think should be mentioned in the same breath as the Sutton finds and the finds from Scandinavia, including one that I recently did. I did not find it, but it was in a museum. It has just been very poorly published. But there are also pieces from these same helmets found in Frisia. So I'm really trying to give shout out to Frisia here.
I think that's really important, though. That's because Frisia in this period is actually a very important nodal point for cultural dissemination into Scandinavia and also out of Scandinavia. Denmark is another sort of like dark spot on the map for this. And I think it's so interesting to hear that Vendel as a term for this time period has sort of like become popularized, because just a couple of decades ago, nobody from Denmark or Norway, for instance, would ever really use that term, because it's so in Scandinavia associated with Sweden.
Maybe it's because Vendel is such a little. Maybe it's because Vendel is such a little shithole. Were it not for all these very important finds that are done there. No, I'm not shitting on Sweden here.
No, it's really interesting, and one thing that I want to kick in here also is the place name evidence. So, and Denmark has like this cluster of Odin place names that are from this time period, where it's like very obviously deliberate that certain local rulers are naming even what appears to might have been temple sites or structures of some kind after Odin. So
we have that in the Netherlands as well, actually, but it is not very much researched. But I could name a few, but I have to be a bit careful about this, because I do not know how far this has been proven. But so, for example, we have a place called Woensdrecht, and we still say Woensdag, and we also say Woede for anger, which is obviously Wodan. So I'm using Odin here in the podcast, but I would usually say Wodan, much like the English, by the way. But and we have Uden from Odin. We have Tinarlo, which is in far north, which has been said to come from Tyr, but I am not sure on this. But we have plenty. I just named a few, but plenty of place names that are quite certainly linked to pre-Christian.
And one interesting thing is that some of those Danish place names with Odin, you have so that's the famous Odense, right?
Yeah.
Odense, which is like the hometown of Hans Christian Andersen and all that stuff. That one means Odin's holy site, or Odin's temple.
Can I say something about Odense, by the way?
Go ahead.
So behind me, there's a few people who can see this, but there's actually a wolf skin right there that I bought in Odense from a lady. Anyway, so back to
So that's Odense, and that's how it's said in modern Danish. Then the exact same place name you can find a little farther southwest, but pronounced Voyens instead. Where the local dialect, it's something that linguists are debating a little bit, but the local dialect seems to have basically retained the diphthong that you also find in Old English and in Dutch, and wo, instead of turning it into a long O. So it's become Voyens instead of Odense. And so you have these two types of place names in the Danish area. One of the things that's really interesting is also to see, when we go back to sort of the trade networks, that Ripa is probably the oldest town in Scandinavia, and it's located in the southwestern part of Denmark,
near the German border.
Yeah, and it was, for that's a very recent event. That border used to be much farther south.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, man.
No, that's okay. No, so the importance of this town is that it seems to have been deliberately created to trade with the Frisians, and you see a lot of Frisian influence on the town, the early material culture, even the plot. The way that the plots are made for the houses and everything very much seems to come straight from Frisia, which tells you a little bit about like the influence on at least southern Scandinavia. And I would say that this precipitates farther into Scandinavia. There's good reason to assume that the story of the Vurlunder, the smith, that we know from Eddic poetry, it's originally that comes from Frisia into Scandinavia.
Yeah. So, I'm just going to pull it back to Berserkers because I've got so many questions I want to ask about this.
Okay, yeah.
So before we get too far off topic, I have a lot that I want to ask.
Yeah.
So, firstly, what is the possibility that they are just a group of mercenaries that are kind of for hire and wander around as a well-trained unit that kind of are out for themselves, wanting gold, I guess, and go to the highest bidder, and it's kind of gone down in legend as being more.
Man, there's so much to this, but let me. So many people know. I think I don't have to talk about this a lot, but let's start at the word berserker. Can either mean bare shirt, a cirque is shirt, or being naked, bare chested, maybe. There's I sadly cannot quote this, but there's still a Frisian word that looks a lot like berserker, and it just slipped my mind. I'm sorry, but were they mercenaries? No, I would say no, but they are definitely a war band that moves separately, or let's put it like this, that moves in the fringes of society. At least that is what the writing tells us, that they are a bit like a modern day biker gang. So you would maybe stay away from them as a normal person, as a non-soldier maybe.
So I would like to interject that this is very much like the saga literature, and especially the later saga literature that I was just looking up. I think it's Gunnlaug, a Serpent Tongue saga, that sort of like uses berserkers as just like sort of like, oh, that's an evil, sort of dishonorable warrior who uses magic, to trick people. So
would they belong to a particular village or town, but kind of live on the outskirts? Is that the idea that it would? One king would have a group of these people kind of at hand in case.
But I wouldn't say they live separately. No, but this also comes from the sagas. But it is said that berserkers might roam the country or the lands individually, and then move from town to town to challenge people in what is called the holmganger, or just generally into a fight, and may join a battle here and there. But this goes a bit more into the writing, and not so much archaeology, obviously. But the later literature definitely makes you think that they moved separately, or along with the Ulfhednar, I should say, but separately from the army. So there's one saga. I'm sorry, I mix up a lot because they appear in some 30-ish sagas, I think, that they moved in front of the army. So they were the first to go into battle because they could not be hurt by iron nor fire, Snorri writes. Other sagas, I think, mention that they just fight individually in all the rage, and they also kill friendly soldiers, but they really move on their own, and they may.
I mean, so in many of the sagas, they're even more like that typical Wild West villain who terrorizes a local community, and then the sheriff has to come and kill him in a gun duel.
Exactly.
It kind of sounds like that friend that you have that is a little bit wild, but you're glad that he's your friend, and
Yeah.
he's not going against you, kind of thing.
The guy that doesn't know his strength. But what I really like is how archaeology is almost on the other spectrum of this image that the writings led to believe. Because if, let's say that indeed and this is not my personal opinion, but let's say that the images from the Vendel era depict berserkers. I will come back to that later, but they show a very structured way of how these people are trained, at least when you follow the images. So the images show a young boy who is taken out of society at a young age, say 7-ish, like in Sparta, or I think Beowulf also says around that age. And then he's being trained until, say, what we now call puberty, on how to fight and how to deal with women, how to hunt, and all that kind of stuff. That is very much part of becoming a man. It's like an initiation ritual, which is in itself very structured, obviously, because you're trained by the surviving elite warriors, the elder of the tribe. So this is all very structured. And then at one point, and this is what these images show, you become this warrior with the horned helmet and the spear, and you have your whole ritual dancing and stuff like that going on. And then you have the writings who show the opposite of that, berserkers going all wild and not taking into account anything that I just described. It's just, really fighting on their own. So this is a very contrasting image. But I have to say, what I said when I started this little ramble is that this is when you think of the images depicting a berserker, which we are not sure about. It is very well possible, and I actually tend to be in this camp, that they do not show berserker, but this is what we later assumed were berserker, which is.
But that's a sort of like a nomenclature issue. Would those people who made those images have called that a berserker or Ufhedna?
Exactly.
I mean, we have no idea what they would have called them, of course, because they left very little written material, mostly, short inscriptions in runes. But if we look at it as sort of like from the phenomenological perspective, right? So this as a phenomenon that has different types of expressions in different human cultures, it seems to be very, very standard, right? That these early cultures, whether we're in Europe or in Asia, Africa, Australia, North or South America, you train warriors in this way. Like in these types of warrior societies, right?
Exactly.
So it seems very likely. I want to also throw in what Jens Peter Schut, the Danish historian of religion, has written about this in terms of initiation rituals. He basically tells us that, the Völsunga saga and the story about Sigurd and the Dragon Slayer and all that stuff, that's one long story about initiation into warriorhood.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have the situation where you're isolated from society as a young man, boy, and then this is where you're living as wolves, by the way. And then there's a reintegration into society. That's the typical sort of structure for initiation rituals.
Yeah, and this is very. I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is very much what the images of Torslunda from the 7th century Sweden describe. Also, images on the Vendel one helmet, which is my favorite grave that I'm reconstructing in the living history stuff. But they show a lot of images of young people, or what I assume are young people, in their initiation phase, fighting the two bears or wolves. This is a famous image that is also seen on the purse that is found in Sutton that you probably talked about, and also the image that is from the Netherlands that I talked about earlier shows a little man in between two beasts or wolves. This changes from location to location, but it's very much a phase of initiation. We also see this being described by the Maasai people in Africa. I do not want to say a one-on-one link is found here, but it looks like these initiation rituals have an undertone, so to speak, all over the world, which is also, by the way, written by Chris Kershaw, who wrote extensively about this, that the Indo-European cultures had a similar way of initiation, and this eventually spread out to what is now Western Europe and Scandinavia. But the idea of young boys being taken out of the tribe from their mothers and being trained to be full-fledged warriors is a very universal thing that we still find in archaeology from the time that we are talking about now.
It makes sense that if you're a warrior culture, then it's about being a warrior, being able to fight, and why not start that at a young age? It's not like they have to go to school necessarily and wait until they reach 16, 17 and they leave and they've got more free time. They can do it from as soon as they can hold a sword or hold a weapon, and as soon as you can start to teach them. So it makes sense that they would start, because they're not held by the same kind of rules that we are today.
Right, they would need to do it because
I guess if somebody attacked the village and you had a bunch of 10-year-old kids, they could at least poke someone with the sharp end of a sword if they needed to.
Exactly.
But it doesn't matter who's holding the sword, I guess.
No. But what I like to say when I talk to people about this that are not as familiar as you are with it, but just the idea of go back into your mind when you were, say, 12 or something, and then think about what you were doing at that time, and then think about what these people were doing at the time. They were fighting lions at the age of 12, or maybe puberty at most, I mean, a lion is a really big fucking animal. And,
that's a good point.
Maasai people, even to this day, still have a ritual where you have to fight a creature like that. I'm you cannot quote me on this. I don't know if they still kill lions like this, but we know from accounts from not too long ago that these people were still fighting lions. And the images from the pre-Christian times show us that they were fighting bears. And this is also what is written down in the sagas later. So just imagine sending your kid that is now probably a YouTuber to far off fucking forest fighting bears.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm glad I grew up now.
Right?
Well, it's interesting to consider that might actually have been sort of a very standard ritual and way of coming of age in many European cultures. I mean, we have so much, broad spectrum like mythology on this in different ways. Obviously, the story of Romulus and Remus being raised by a wolf is also part of this whole complex, right? We have Greek stories about fighting various demons and animals and lions too, of course. And it's a very standard sort of tale. The young fighting some monster from the outside. So it makes perfect sense that this could have been the sort of the way that young warriors were raised.
And I think another very interesting thing to this is that the ritual aspect, or maybe even the magical aspect in this whole initiation is that I'm sitting here with my long hair still, and there's actually a lot written about the cutting off hair, which is still done to this day when you join the army. I know all about it by now. and I look forward to cutting off my hair. Anyway, that the Kati tribe, or the Chatti, I think it's Kati, by the way, from Germany, and some other tribes as well. They would take the kids from their mother, from the tribe, start the whole initiation that we just talked about, and then at some point they would kill themselves, quite literally, in the sense that they either cut off their hair in the ritual itself, or they cut off their hair when they killed their first enemy. But it all comes down to that they killed their persona that they were before they left the tribe, so that they could only be killed physically. So they did a ritualized death, so that they would get into the mindset, okay, I am now part of the hair, the army, and now I can only die in battle. And that was obviously very sacred to them. And this obviously is seen later when you're talking about the Valkyrie and the Valhalla, or Valhall, and the whole chosen warriors by Odin.
You even have sort of like an echo of this in Harald Finehair of Norway, right? The legend says that he wouldn't cut his hair until he had conquered all of Norway.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that is very reminiscent of what was done before that, and I cannot phrase enough that how different it may be, but these written sources that describe this initiation process may or may not have been widely different from the centuries before that, but generally we do know that some form of ritual which is close to what is described later is taking the boy apart from the tribe and then making him a full-fledged adult warrior. And adults also, by the way, nowadays you can enter the army at 29 here, because I'm 29. I'm doing it right now. But these warrior societies considered people adult by what we call puberty, so say 15, 16. And obviously the chances that you died before your 30s were pretty fucking high.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So it seems as if we've kind of got two ends of the spectrum with the Berserkers, whether it's one is they're frenzied kind of animals almost, there's no control in them, and the other is that they're a very much specialized soldier who's been taught from a young age, and they're going to be disciplined, kind of the elite of the elite. Where do you go? Which one do you think they are, if you're going to go?
Okay, I would say that Berserker is maybe more of a concept. So people describe, I'm going berserk, and you have the modern phrase, at least over here, is running amok, which is really the same thing anyway. But so in the sagas, and I'm not an expert on sagas, I know shit about sagas, but going berserk is some kind of process that is obviously comes from a ritual that you do before or maybe during battle. But I think that saying going berserk is something different than being a berserker. So if you go berserk, you may enter a state where you say have a rush of adrenaline, and you disregard what you might have learned in fighting techniques or whatever, and you feel invincible. Much like, say, a woman sees her child being taken by some stranger. Man, I'm going really off the chart here, but and feels this primal rage of being a mother and wanting to beat the living fuck out of this man that took a child. That is, I think, what is going berserk. But if you follow the sagas, going berserk is something different, and may or it's not different, but may refer to a ritual that is quite possibly or quite realistically not done by ingesting hallucinogenic, what a word, substance that is generally believed, but is most likely not true. But here we go back to the image of dancing figures and ritualized magical warfare.
So I'll have to say that with the ingesting psilocybins, hallucinogens, and all that stuff, that comes straight up from a Danish scholar from the 1600s who was just like pulling shit out of his ass. That's where all that stuff comes from when it comes to Berserker.
The guy was full of shit.
But aside from that, so I'd say there's a couple of things to say about the saga literature. That this ritual that you're talking about, this tradition, is sort of like an underlying undercurrent of what the saga literature is otherwise saying about Berserker. I agree very much that this is where it all comes from. But what it looks like is that most of the saga writers, they are basically just seeing these Berserker as sort of like demonic warriors in league with the devil. That's how these Christian authors from the 13th century are basically seeing it. So that's also how they're quite often representing them. You can sort of like see it in sort of like a spectrum. There are some that seem to be very genuine in representation, and then they get more and more cartoonish in their representation.
Yeah, exactly.
If they were elite level
sort of
warriors,
spectrum like that, yeah.
If they were in fact elite level warriors, how much could that appear to be demonic to somebody looking in from the outside? If it's, I guess, if you had, it just put it in broad terms of like MMA fighting. If you had somebody who was kind of trained, and then you had an elite level top of the UFC training, if you put those two together, like one would appear to almost be kind of godlike because it is on such a level above everybody else. And that's why I was kind of thinking back to in battle, if you had a warrior who was a lot better than other people and was killing more people than anybody else, from kind of the other side or looking in, whether he's on your side or not, you're going to be thinking, fuck me, look at this guy. Like, has he got some sort of magical power around him? Why is he so much better? You don't want to go near him if you're against him, and if you're on his side, you're like, it almost, I guess, gives you a boost. And is also that
consider theatrics? Consider theatrics, right? This is something that has always been used by warriors. Theatrics to basically build yourself up in the minds of this is psychological warfare, in the minds of your opponent. Right. Mm-hmm. So if you stand there on the battlefield before you go into battle and you're doing this ritual, of course we know the haka from the Maori as an example of this, and there are plenty of other cultures that have similar styles of rituals for warfare. And even I think it was in the Iraq War, the American troops played heavy metal to freak out people. Those kinds of things happen all over, and this is part of warfare as well. If you can freak your enemy out, then you have a better chance at winning. And
I think a very good example of that would be somebody like Conor McGregor, who win. I relate to things I know, and I know quite a bit about like the UFC and fighting. So when you get somebody like him who won most of his early fights from getting in people's heads, and it was mental warfare before they even stepped into the fight. In most cases, he'd already won because he was inside somebody's head and he was already appearing larger than life and it was intimidating to people. And I guess that's no different than being on a battlefield. If you had someone who was in that way, who struck you with that kind of, I've already lost before I've even started, then you're already in a bad position.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can. I can make a really nice bridge here, because obviously this is what we play with in Heilung. So the thing that I am part of with these 8 other people, the little warband, and the few songs that we are on, we play with the idea of intimidating. So we have the song Hakkeskaldur, for example, and Mathias knows literally what the word means, probably being a Dane. Anyway, we try to have the audience chant along, obviously, but it is intentioned as being some sort of a haka, which is not necessarily where the word refers to, by the way. But
no, I've been puzzled by that ever since I saw it the first time.
Okay, funny. Okay, ask them later. But the idea of chanting as a war group, especially when you know the whole yada yada with the spears that we do and blah blah blah, it does put you in this state of mind of getting into battle. And when we do that on stage, and we have these thousands, sometimes maybe 15,000 people in front of us, and only a little portion of that tags along and shouts along with the song, that makes you feel really, really powerful, obviously. And
well, there is such thing as a flow state where you just get into that mindset where almost anything you do, it's a weird position to be in, and anybody that's kind of experienced it, it's like you can see things before they happen, or
exactly, yeah,
and or you just have this it's almost otherworldly kind of sense to it. And if you can get into that state before you go to battle, it's all, I guess it can only help.
But there's really 2 things to there, and there's something that I want to add as well. So if this, what we are talking about right now, this feeling, if this is maybe what they call Berserker Ganger, then it has 2 sides. One is that you feel invincible, and this might be to your advantage. The other side, and I know this from personal experience being in martial arts, is when you feel like this, you might feel overpowered, and you may actually not be. So it might work against you, I want to say, because you want to disregard everything and just go all out. And when you are, say, Conor McGregor level, if you're talking about UFC, and you're that good, then you might turn it to your advantage indeed. Mm-hmm. But I would say that Berserker Ganger, if you take it literally as described, and as this feeling that we're talking about, it might not always be to the advantage of your army or your friends or to yourself. But what you talked about before, Daniel, I wanted to interrupt, but I didn't. This idea of becoming this state had obviously all to do with the idea of becoming a bear or a wolf, what the Ulfhednar or the Berserker, and we haven't really touched that yet. But the idea of becoming the animal that is that you identify with as a strong animal that you look up to. I can't find the right words right now, but obviously the wolf and the bear had a very significant place in mythology and I would say day-to-day culture, even, because we're seeing it on the helmets, we're seeing it on the images, we are seeing it in the sagas. But the becoming of the wolf or the becoming of the bear through dancing or whatever is obviously what the whole initiation and the ritual is all about. And we should not forget that these animals were totemized and were very much part of warfare and fighting in pre-Christian culture.
Absolutely.
And the fucking terrifying animals. So if you're gonna want to take any of the spirits of an animal into battle, I guess they're the ones you would want. It'd be no good like taking a rabbit or something.
Yeah, and also the idea, if you look at the images that and the killing of a bear as a young boy, with that in the back of your mind that you killed a bear at a young age and you go into battle at a later age, you might feel fucking invincible. I bet.
For sure.
Like living in bear country, I'm not entirely sure. I think they're that terrifying, to be honest.
Yeah.
But these are, of course, black bears. They're smaller and everything. But you know, I have just on occasion yelled at them to fuck off, and then they do.
How did you feel, Mathias?
Very powerful.
I bet you did. All I can imagine is you walking around the woods now telling bears to fuck off.
It actually happens from time to time. Well, actually, no. So the one that I told to fuck off, that was on my porch.
Okay. It was deserved, was it?
Yeah, it was. He was on my trash.
You weren't bullying poor bears in the woods.
But that's how it is. Like a couple of times. I mean, Boulder down the hill or the mountains, downhill. That's what we call it. Is a community of 100,000 people. And sometimes you like in the evening you look down an alley and you see a bear running past down there. so they're a little more just like giant rats around here.
Well, I think
that's the brown, that's the black bears, not the brown or grizzlies. And
no. Right.
Black bears are a little more cuddly.
Yeah. They can still fuck you up though. I mean,
I mean, not to discredit all these young boys back in pre-Christian times, but these bears were a bit small, indeed.
Yeah.
Don't take it away from them now.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, I've got a couple of last things I want to ask. I made a list.
Oh, okay.
So one would be like the Lewis Chessman piece that I guess a lot of people have seen of the man biting his shield, and I guess a lot of people would say that's a berserker. Do you think it is, or do you think it's just a warrior who happens to be biting his shield?
Well, I can say a few things about this. I was actually one of my recent bandmates that joined recently is from Lewis Island. He lives there, and we talked about his chess piece because there was a new find actually last year, I think, or 2 years ago. A piece added to the board. So
I think we spoke by somebody found it in the drawer in the living room, I think.
Yeah,
or an antique store, something like that. But indeed, it's quite it's quite something. But indeed, we see a warrior biting on the shield, and this is something that has been described more than once, I think. So this biting on the shield is indeed linked to the Berserker. However, I think there's one saga, I'm not sure which one, which describes a warrior on a horseback biting his shield. So I think, did I do that literally? I'm not sure. I've done it on stage, just for the ones out there that know the image.
How does it feel?
A bit. It tastes a bit weird, but it's also numerous times. Anyway, so it is linked to the Berserker. Is it done in this ritual that we talked about? I'm not sure. Maybe, but yeah.
Can I just interject something here? So this thing about biting the shields, right? So the Lewis chessmen, they're from what, the 12th century?
The 11th century, I think, around Hastings time.
Okay. Yeah. So the saga texts that talk about Berserker biting the shields, they're younger than the chessmen. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean that the concept of biting a shield isn't sort of like shared across this source material. But it's really it's an important little thing about the idea of Berserker in the saga literature, that they're biting the shields. And let's see, I think I found it right here. Yes, so blah, blah, blah. This is chapter 6 of Ynglinga Saga, the beginning of the collection of Norwegian king sagas known as Heimskringla. We are learning about Odin's skills. And it says, let's just see. It is said with truth that when Ausa Odin came to the Northlands, that would be Scandinavia, and the Diar, that's the Aesir, or their high priests. This is kind of a weird representation of Nordic mythology, but bear with me. With him, they introduced and taught the skills practiced by men for a long time afterwards. Odin was the most prominent among them all, and from him they learned all the skills because he was the first to know them. Now, as to why he was honored so greatly, the reasons for that are these. He was so handsome and noble to look at when he sat among his friends that it gladdened the hearts of all. So this is a very nice looking Odin. But when he was engaged in warfare, he showed his enemies a grim aspect. There we go. The reasons for this were that he knew the arts by which he could shift appearance and body any way he wished. For another matter, he spoke so well and so smoothly that all who heard him believed all he said was true. All he spoke was in rhymes, as is now the case in what is called skaldship, so scolded poetry. He and his temple priests are called songsmiths because that art began with them in the northern lands. Odin was able to cause his enemies to be blind or deaf or fearful in battle, and he could cause their swords to cut no better than wands. His own men went to battle without coats of mail and acted like mad dogs or wolves. They bit their shields, there we go, and were as strong as bears or bulls. They killed people, and neither fire nor iron affected them. This is called Berserker Rage. So that's the source. That's the primary source.
The saga, right?
Yes, and the important thing about this one is that it represents Odin as some kind of evil sorcerer from Turkey or Iran or somewhere. That's a really important detail here, because what it's basically saying is that he has the power to imbue his warriors with some kind of like demonic rage, right? That they can take out on their enemies, and they won't feel pain and all that stuff. And in that context, they're also biting their shields as sort of like a trope that says that demonstrates the madness. Now, whether or not that was something that people,
I mean, it does make the whole concept of biting your shield very tangible, of course, especially when you see it in the material culture as the Lewis chess piece, of course. So what I think is that what is described in the sources, you shouldn't take it with a grain of salt, but there's definitely some part that you can kind of disregard, I guess. And then there's the underlying layer of things that probably actually happened. So the whole ritual dancing and the mindset of becoming the animal that you represent, being a bear or a wolf, and there's probably something to say for their way of fighting and how they behaved in battle, but there's just a whole lot that we don't know, I guess.
Well, I mean, so what this really suggests to me, like both the depiction and also the literature talking about biting your shield, is that it could probably be some like a saying, when somebody was getting pissed off and like getting really mad or something like that, you can say, "Oh, he's really biting his shield over there."
Exactly. Indeed.
Okay,
So,
perfect. Right, let's wrap this up. It's been fun. Yeah. It's been a fun one. We had one question just from the new Discord channel, and that was, how many names are there for Odin? I know there's a lot. Is there a definitive number? Or
I think some 270 or something.
Okay, a lot.
But Matthias probably knows.
He's looking around like
Yeah,
he's
no,
trying to
it's like-
find
He's looking for all the names.
Well, so the bulk of the names are enumerated in Grimnismal,
Yeah.
Grimnis poem or Grimnis lake, and I don't think we get beyond 40 there though.
Really?
And someone's asking, are any of them Joe? No, I'm sorry. He doesn't go by Joe in any instances that I've encountered, at least.
And one last thing, we have to give a shout out to possibly the greatest troll of the year, which is Ed Gamester in the he's going to put. Mike's just pulled it up here. Matthias, I don't know if you want to read it, but this is the greatest trolling that I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, I read that.
In all my years of being on the internet, and so everybody who's listened to the episode will know Ed Gamester by now from our Havmal episode, and
legendary.
He obviously got fed up with a certain type of people or certain type of person in the traditional Nordic tattoo group. So he made a quite tongue-in-cheek post that triggered a lot of Viking bros, I think.
Oh yeah.
Matthias, do you want to read it?
Sure, I can read it. So he wrote, as most of you know, I recently found out my ancestral DNA is 0.16% Native American and therefore Viking, because everybody knows Vikings discovered America. It has changed my life. I've been putting horns on my hats since I was a kid.
I mean, I should join him again.
Yeah, you should join him. I'm a Norseman by blood. To celebrate my newfound culture, I want to get 9 tattoos, one of each of the Viking gods, Odin, Thor, Frigg, etc. I can't name them all yet. I also want to get 0.16% written in rune numbers to represent my ancestors. I found an artist, but he's really bad at drawing, so if somebody could sketch the design up for me, that would be great. I've been reading the ancient literature, and so far my favorite character is Legolas. So if you could tie him into the design, that would be perfect. What is it our people say? Skull.
Yeah.
It's such a great post because it hits the mark on so many people that are in that group.
I saw a lot of butthurt comments.
There was a lot of people. There were a lot of people calling him an idiot and taking him quite seriously, which I found even more hilarious.
The people of Norse read this because they will fuck him up, I'm sure.
He's on the enemy list now.
When I could rant, but let's not.
No, it definitely made me laugh. I mean, I can't wait to have him back on for the second episode.
Oh yeah,
I have to admit that actually, I really enjoyed that comment and also the ensuing commentopocalypse.
I think it's had like 1,000 comments on it now.
Yeah,
it seems to be one way or the other. People either take it literally and get upset about it, or people just find it absolutely hilarious.
Exactly, yeah. But I have to admit that at this point I have left that group because I am just sick of.
Yeah, it's so full of shit.
That's the problem. If you scroll through your Facebook feed, you just do get message, post after post after post, people saying, "Can you draw me this? Can you translate me this?
Yeah.
I'm 1% Scandinavian. I want to get a tattoo. What do I get? Can I have or the other really popular one is, I want to get a tattoo of Odin. Give me some inspiration." Yeah. And then it's like, what?
I just checked out my Ancestry.com results. They've been updated lately.
And, I saw.
And apparently I am 1% Baltic. So I'm going to start exploring my Baltic ancestry and start wearing, I don't know, Estonian hats or whatever, like whatever I can find from over
any of those tests yet. It looks quite interesting. I would probably be biting my shield by now if I had my results. But yeah, it's quite expensive actually.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Ruben, do you want to give a shout out to your social media where people can find you?
Yeah,
So you do some awesome photography on there.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that, and actually, I really enjoyed talking about the whole phenomena of Vednar Berserker instead. But yeah, my Instagram is Woedans, Dutch for of Odins, but it's written Woedans on Instagram, and I post a lot of photography on there, and yeah, just general shit.
Matthias, what about you?
You can always find me on Instagram as well by my name, Mathias Nordvig. I shit post a lot there too. So there you go.
Brilliant. So yeah, you can follow obviously our Instagram, Nordic Mythology Podcast on Instagram, same on Facebook. We recently just restructured the Patreon, added a few extra rewards, kind of moved about the tiers, so people get more bang for the buck. We also added a Discord channel, so this basically just a modern day chat room where you can join and kind of we're making like a little community in there. Obviously, you have our website, NordicMythologyPodcast.com. We've got a bunch of t-shirts on there. We've got the Raven from the North, Odin, like Raven Odin design. You can follow me, Daniel Farrand 1 on Instagram, obviously, and Horns of Odin as well. So yeah, I think that's everything.
Can I say one more thing, by the way?
Of course.
About the whole subject for the people who are really interested or want to know more about this whole phenomena of Berserker and Vednar. A lot of this is written down by Dr. Roderick Dale, and his thesis is online. It is quite a long read, but I mean, it speaks so much to the imagination that I can see a lot of people wanting to read more. And what we just did, we kind of skipped the surface a bit. And I haven't said everything that I wanted to say, but obviously we only have a limited amount of time. Read more.
And by the way, Roderick Dale is going to join us in the future on this podcast.
Oh, yeah, look, that's amazing.
Yeah, he's an awesome guy.
Right. Say hi.
So, if you hang around for a couple of minutes after, we'll make sure Mike gets the details, and we'll make sure we add it to any posts we do so people can read up on it as well.
Oh yeah, amazing.
Awesome. That's the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.